you're in danger. This can happen to you. I'm just a normal guy. I was doing what I thought was the right thing. And my livelihood got absolutely destroyed. And Dave Chappelle says it's best in one of his stand-up. He says, taking a man's livelihood is akin to taking his life. They took my life.
This is Trish, and welcome to Teacher Therapy. Today we have a very special guest named Ed Ruse, and he worked in education as both a teacher and a principal. But today we're going to hear the story about how he was lied about, fired, canceled, and blacklisted from education, and it is a wild story. So Ed, I would love to go ahead and jump right in, and you can just kind of tell us about what were the early years of your teaching career like? Was it successful? Was it enjoyable? And then you can walk us up to the story and we'll take it from there.
So, around 2002, I was a sales manager for a local software company. Things are going great. I'm content. But after work, I'm coaching soccer, and on the weekends, I'm teaching skiing, and realizing that I really enjoy working with kids. And, those tests you would take in high school that tell you what you should do for a living, mine always came back as a teacher, but my parents were teachers and I saw the struggles of it, and so I was kind of ignoring it. But come 2003, I just realized it was what I really liked doing. I had a knack for assessing kids where they were, helping them grow, whether it was in skiing or soccer or whatever it was, and realized that this would be a good skill for teaching. So I went back, got my master's degree, started to teach around 2004, and just really enjoyed it. Had a lot of success. My first job was at a Title I school called Thurgood Marshall in Seattle. They gender separated their classes. So it was in the predominantly Black neighborhood at the time, and they had an all girls and an all boys. And I ended up with an all boys third grade class, and loved it. I had subbed there. I went to that school to interview and said, I want to be in one of your, at the time I'd subbed in a fourth grade boys class. I said, I would love to be back in that fourth grade. They offered third, I took it. The other thing they did is we separated our subjects. So I taught math and science. My partner did literacy, so that we could focus on our subject and become really good at it. So I had a lot of success. I fully immersed myself in my work. I wasn't really familiar with what was going on out in the South End schools. And I was shocked when I got there. The gang signs that were painted all over the building, and the students would tell me what they meant and who was fighting who. And it was just a little bit shocking to experience all that. And we would do home visits. So we would go visit every single home before school got started, which was critical, because if I had a student who wasn't turning in their homework, but I'd been to their home and realized they lived in an apartment with multiple siblings, it was somewhat of a chaotic environment. I was much more empathetic to the situation at that point, and could find a space for them to learn. And then I also realized that, the gangs were just all over that neighborhood, and some of the kids thought it was funny, and I needed to show them a different way out. So I started a mentor group. I brought in successful Black dads who had grown up in that neighborhood, become successful. I had them come in and talk to my class about the way that they got out and became successful. I had teachers. I had a music producer, someone who worked as at a playhouse that was in the area, someone that was an outdoorsman. So we just brought in as many people as we could, and loved it there, had great success. And I didn't think about the connection with the kids that I was making and how it would impact student scores. But eventually the scores came out, and my kids had a 30% increase in 1 year. And I would give credit to a program called Accelerated Math. And soon after, the district discontinued the use of that, which I was extremely disappointed about, fought hard for. Still to this day, don't quite understand why you would discontinue a program that I just had a 30% increase in 1 year with. So I move on from there, go to another school, again, continue my teaching career. It was a half public Montessori program, half regular ed. City schools that were struggling at the time would create a magnet program. This magnet program was a Montessori program, as a way of getting people to come to the school. So I learned a new way of teaching through the Montessori approach of letting kids kind of lead you, and you guide them and support them. And again, had a lot of success. Every student in my writing class passed the 4th grade state assessment in writing. So I was just having a lot of success assessing kids, helping them grow, just like I was with coaching, and it worked. And then my principal asked if I would like to be on a teacher advisory council for the district. And their goal was to hire this organization called Center for Teaching Quality. And they came in and they met with the union and teachers, and they wanted to find out what teachers needed to be successful in the classroom. And I bring this up because after a year of researching, interviewing teachers, looking at data, they came up with one word, and the word was time. All this research, all this data, a whole year of it, and teachers said, all we really need is more time. And this is important because later, as I became a principal, I never forgot that. I felt as a teacher at the time that it felt on deaf ears with the district. They were constantly inundating us with a professional development, taking up all their time, but not just giving us time to implement what we had learned. And so when I became a principal later on, there would be some professional developments where I would just say, okay, today's professional development, I need you to do X, Y, Z, and then go spend time in your classrooms. And so I never forgot that. So after having a little bit of success in the classroom, I realized that I wanted to go into leadership permanently. And so I went back and got my principal certification from the University of Washington. And I transitioned into leadership around, let me think about that, 2013, and got my first job in 2016 as an assistant principal. And this was at a school called View Ridge in Seattle. And it came with a really grim, scary warning. And that was that as I was walking into the interview, a teacher friend of mine was walking out, and she pulls me aside and says, hey, I just want you to know that I interviewed for this, but I'm not going to take the job if it's given to me. And she explained how there was a Black teacher there who had serious discipline and performance concerns. And anytime you bring it up with her, she's going to claim that it's discrimination and it will destroy your career. And I did not realize how true that was at the time. So I decided as principal that the best way to deal with this teacher who I'd been warned about was just to surround her with kindness and as much support as I can give her. So I made her a leader in our building. I assigned her to our building leadership team. She was on our equity committee. Together, she and I created a Black Inventors program. So for Black History Month, she said she wanted to do a school-wide project on Black inventors throughout time. And so she and I worked together, and I told the teachers, I want your projects completed by this date, and I want them in the hallways for everyone to see. I didn't want it just done in silos, hidden in the classrooms, because I wanted to create a welcoming environment that was inclusive. I did not focus on divisive DEI. I focused on welcoming and including everybody. And so as part of that, I wanted them on display for everyone to see. It was a huge success. I would give her a lot of credit for doing that. So the first 3 years, we're doing great together. We're working together. Things are going great. But she had a tendency to be late with everything. And this was hard on me because here I was having success with her, making her a leader. Things are going great. She's in my office regularly talking to me about her ideas, but now I have to give her some negative feedback. And I'd been warned about this and how this was going to go. So I had to start to explain to her the impact it had on others, that when you're late with your attendance, the attendance secretary can't get her work done in time. When you're late to lunch, the lunch manager can't clean up and get ready for the next lunch because he's waiting for yours. When you don't pick up your kids at recess on time, then whoever's watching your kids is late to get their kids. If you're late to library, the librarian's dealing with 2 classes. She's just exited your class, and now there's one coming in, and she's trying to manage 2 classes. I gave her examples of how one time one of her kids got out, was running around the library, tore a book. And, I was being very supportive, but firm with her about it. And sure enough, she would do this move that she did where she would rub her arm when I talked to her, which was her way of saying, you're just saying that because of the color of my skin. To which I was like, no, if there was any teacher who was late for anything like this, we would be having the same conversation. And the one that was the most egregious is that she arrived after the school bell. She was a kindergarten teacher. She would not call ahead, and the bell would ring and she'd arrive afterwards. So I met with her and just said, what is going on? And she talked about how she had insomnia, or a friend of hers had passed away. There's always some excuse. I said, just give me a call so we at least have a heads up. I could get a sub for the day, but she didn't. And so what it would be is that I would see kids running around the hallway. I'd go outside and say, what's going on? They say, our teacher's not here. And I'd go down, there'd be an empty classroom, doors locked, dark room. And I would just call the secretary and say, all right, cancel my morning. I got to cover this class once, as long as an hour and a half late. So that was the most egregious thing. I met with her. I said, you and I are going to meet every Friday. We'll talk about time management. I bought her alarms for her classroom. I helped her set alarms in her phone. I helped her set up a schedule to not be late with anything. But after many, many times arriving after the bell, I'm embarrassed to say it was probably 10, I contacted Human Resources, and we had to take it outside the building and get someone else involved. And Human Resources brought her in. She cried crocodile tears in the meeting. They gave her a slap on the wrist. And as we were leaving, she just turns to me and says, you should never have done that. Tears stopped instantly. And I was like, oh, that sounds very ominous. So it should be noted also that when I started at the school, the principal, I was assistant principal. This principal asked me to work on the decision-making matrix for the building. And the decision-making matrix would be every decision that has to be made in the building and who has the final decision. Only 20% of the decisions in a building did I, as principal, have the final decision. So strangely, principals have very little power. We cannot hire, fire, or reprimand and discipline without going through somebody else like Human Resources. So that was a little bit shocking to realize how little power we have there. But when it comes to blame, we got 100% of the blame. So from that point on, Human Resources is basically coaching me every step of the way on how to handle the progressive discipline. And despite having issues with her, by the spring of 2019, it's the pinnacle of my career. It was like all of these programs that I had started. I started a MTSS program, an RTI program, response to intervention, for students who were struggling, but not quite in special ed, but they needed that little extra bump. I got a reading specialist who came in. We ran reading programs. Our goal was to get every person reading by third grade at grade level. So that was our focus. And it was gaining traction, and our test scores were going through the roof. When you looked at our growth of cohort data, so you look at third grade, fourth and fifth over a 3-year period, it had all shot up through the roof. Our surveys, the students and teachers were always really high, but now I finally got the staff on board as well. And in the spring of 2019, 96% of the staff said that they liked working at our school most days. So some of those had increased by 30% since my first year. So things were looking good. I was feeling good. It was the data that I needed to know that the work that I was doing was working. You're never quite sure as you're going through it, but as it starts to gain that traction and go up, it's very affirming and felt great. In addition to that, as I said before, we were focusing on inclusive environments. I had the teachers do this exercise where we walked through the building, and I said, I want you to walk through the building with different lenses. So for example, let's just walk through the building as if you're African-American. Where in this building are you represented or not represented? And then let's do it for Latinos and Asians and Native Americans. I wanted to make sure that everybody was welcomed and represented in our building. And so that's part of, those projects that I had. We did a lot of art projects. We did a lot of visits to museums and whatnot. We were just doing the great work. And as a result, we were a school of recognition 2 of the years that I was there from our state organization. And they had a committee called the Educational Opportunity Gap Oversight and Accountability Committee. And they gave us a school of recognition for our work on reducing the achievement gap. And in 2019, on the family survey, our greatest increase was welcoming and culturally responsive school climate. So the state was recognizing us. The parents were recognizing it. Things were going great. Couldn't be better. Then we get the student in the spring of 2019 who has extreme behaviors. I'll quote one of the articles. But in one of the articles that comes out later, it was quoted in here to say that he'd been through a lot in life, including domestic violence. He received special education services, struggled with post-traumatic stress disorder, and could get overwhelmed and act out, running around the school, threatening people, throwing things, and often trying to leave the building and walk home. So in Seattle, when you have a student with these type of behaviors, we have a program called the Elementary Behavior Disorder Program. It's really for students that have pretty severe behaviors, like I mentioned here. And it was just down the street. It was a Laurelhurst school. I had worked there. They had a great EBD program. They were miracle workers there. A good EBD program would take students who are in crisis, hold them accountable, give them a really clear, drawn out plan for what they, how to behave at school, how to improve, and how to be engaged at school. And then their goal is to get them back into the regular ed classroom. And they did it on a regular basis. And while I was there, I saw several kids get exited out of that program and into either the regular resource special ed program, which was mainly push-in, or back into the class. So a lot of success at that school. So I'm working with district and just saying, we don't have the resources for elementary behavior disorder. I don't have a isolation room. We don't have the curriculum. I don't have a staff that's trained with this or experienced with this. And I said, he really needs to be in this EBD program. Even security for the district came out, and he finally got frustrated with me. And he said, I can't keep coming out to this building. I'm coming out to your building more than anywhere else. And he said, this student needs to be at Laurelhurst in EBD. And I told him, I said, I know, I've been asking the district, and they refuse to move him over there. I mean, they keep saying collect data, the ABC data, which is what you collect for behavior. We would do it. We proved that he was blowing up every 30 minutes, which is clearly an EBD program. And we got to this almost this movie moment where I was like yelling at them in a meeting saying, why are you not giving him the services he needs down here at Laurelhurst? You'd send him down there for a few months. He'll be back up here. He needs to be stabilized and cared for. And they told us that they were not putting any more Black students in the EBD program at that time, and that we'd have to figure it out at our school. So I go to meet with one of my special ed teachers who I had worked with at Laurelhurst. I said, we got to figure it out here. We're on our own. So he and I put together a program, just a personalized program. We pulled one of his IAs. We're supposed to be 5-to-1. They're supposed to have 5 students. I say, I'm sorry, they got to be one-on-one with him at all times. So he was never alone. He always had an IA with him. And the success is that by the last few months that he was with us, and he's with us for a year, he did not have any more tantrums. It went from 1 every 30 minutes to 0 the last few months. But there was one incident where he was taking a timeout in the play court, and we were literally in there playing ball with him. There's about 4 adults in there, because I, as a principal, don't get called to all else has failed. So you usually have the IA that was with him at all times, and then he would call the special ed teacher to come help. And then they would call maybe the assistant principal, nurse, or counselor. And then after all else has failed, they call me in to come in and help out. And we were just in there trying to distract him he was trying to attack another student. When that teacher comes in with the other student that he had been fighting with, kind of escalates the situation again, and she just starts screaming, you're caging him in here. And I'm like, this is a play court. We're playing ball with him. And, and I didn't think anything of it at the time, but, everything resolved itself. We moved on. And I would say that, so that was spring of 19, didn't hear much about it until about a year later. And there's this book called Race to the Bottom by Luke Rosiak. And Luke Rosiak writes a whole chapter on Seattle schools in there about our equity department downtown, and how there were managers in this equity department with the school district who were making such statements as, you're just a white person at central office, so everything that you say is racist. So I felt like this DEI wokeness by 2020 was just getting out of hand. And I didn't know about it at the time because I don't work at district. And in my building, things were looking up and going well. And I think the first sign of things are getting weird is that sometimes I'd be downtown and a manager down there would ask me, how are things going at your building? And when I said fine, they would kind of look at me like, are you sure? And I said, yeah, I don't have any problems at my building. Everything's going great. And they seemed disappointed to hear that, almost like they wanted you to go out and find some kind of controversy to bring up. And I just didn't have anything at the time. Then actually in the fall of 19, to back up a little bit, I guess this is really where it just came to head. I was in, we were doing this DEI training. I'd signed our building up to go to a district DEI training. And at the conclusion, the person who's running the meeting says, therefore, all white people are racist. You should take a sign, write on it, I'm a racist, hang it around your neck, take a picture of it, and put it up on social media as a way of addressing the fact that you're a racist. And that was when I was like, whoa, what just happened? Now, this is fall of 19. I kind of look around the building like, is anyone else hearing this? And I was shocked that no one complained. No one came and talked to me. And we were in an equity meeting maybe a month or two after that. And I just said, can I just ask you guys, is that really what happened? Did this happen? I went through those steps and they're like, yes, it happened. I said, well, how did no one complain or say anything? And they're like, no, everyone's too scared to speak up. I said, okay, something's not right here. It's really heating up now. And the problem is that when you state that all white people are racist, you're talking about all the students, all the parents. I mean, students as young as 4, 5, 6 years old. That is not the way we should be looking at our students. It's so divisive and dangerous to say that, because once you state that, and it comes from the district, that all white people are racist, now you're looking at everything we do through that racist lens. And all of a sudden, that's kind of the way it was. I started to get complaints from parents. Like if I called a parent with a complaint, they would say, oh, this sounds a little bit discriminatory. And I would say, I'm calling because your student just asked a 4th grade girl if she'd like to have sex with him. You should probably know about that. It has nothing to do with race or whatever the situation may have been. It just seemed to always be, it's because you have an unconscious bias or this is racism. And then I had a teacher come up to me at one point and she was crying and she said, I am so sick and tired of going to board meetings or the citywide PTA meetings and having them refer to the entire community that I taught in, the View Ridge community, as that racist community. And that our board member at the time said, I'm not going to spend any time in that community, even though she represented us. I need to spend time where I'm needed in other communities. And it was just like everything at that point had become about race. I mean, and I wasn't the only one having to deal with it. Our superintendent was under pressure from the NAACP to resign because they thought that she was discriminating. The school board president was subsequently accused of racism. It was just going crazy. It was like a powder keg just waiting for that match. And this teacher had that match. So in October of 2019, I get a complaint from EEOC and OCR that I had caged a Black student at school. And all throughout this investigation, the district pretty much supported me. And because they knew the history of this teacher, and they had said that she'd been filing OCR complaints against previous principals that she had. So they kind of had my back. But then Seattle principals do not have a union, but we have an association called the Principal Association of Seattle Schools. And so the PASS rep came out to me and she said, now there's a reporter kicking this story around, asking questions down at district, doing public record requests. And it's going to be a story about you caging a student. And so I knew a news director at that media outlet. And it was our local NPR affiliate, KUOW. And I called her and I said, what's going on with this story? She said, oh, that reporter can write whatever she wants. She has free reign here. But she said, I'll talk to their director. And she gets back to me and says, story's killed for now, but could come back later. The school board sends someone to come out and investigate because they've got word of it now. And the lady who came out and investigated just said, can you just walk me through what happened? I took her out to the play court where it happened. I showed her the play court. I told her what we were doing, and she was appalled. She just said, this is not a cage. This is a play court you would see in any school in America that was born. A school that was built in the 50s. And I said, exactly. And she was mad. She said, I'll go back to the board and let her know that they're being a pawn in some kind of personnel dispute. And I said, great. So now things are getting a little bit crazy. We're into the spring of 20, COVID closures happen in March. George Floyd is killed in May. The summer protests happen. And during the summer, there's a radio station I was listening to, and the guy on the station says, "You think it's bad now? Wait till school starts. Once school starts in September, you guys are next. They're coming after you." And I just went, "Oh my God, he is right." I thought this teacher would totally be someone who would weaponize the situation in this time frame and use it to her advantage. And that's pretty much exactly, in my opinion, what happened. So now we're into October of 20. So this following fall, the OCR investigation wraps up, and it dismissed all of her claims that I had retaliated and discriminated against her. And there was zero evidence that there was ever a cage, of course. So all this gets dismissed. She's not happy about it. And the following month, November, the past rep comes back to my building and says, "Hey, this article that was on KUW is back again. They're starting to poke around again. It's coming out." So I call my friend who had worked there, and she's no longer there. So now I'm like, uh-oh. And the past rep comes a few days after that, maybe a week later, and says this story's heating up. I can't kill it at this point. I don't have any contacts down there. And the past rep says, "The district needs to save face. They're going to let you go." I was shocked. It was the first time that the district did not have my back through the investigation. They knew that it was lies, but I think that it was just a time where the superintendent was under pressure from the NAACP to resign. The school board was under pressure. Everybody was getting it. It wasn't a time to come out and defend this situation. They didn't know what to do. So they said, "We'll let you go. And if you go, it'll kill the story because we've dismissed this investigation. It no longer exists. No one can public record request it at this point. We won't cooperate with an article. It'll kill the story if you go." I did not want to go, but it was made pretty clear to me that it wasn't an option. It was just such a divided time. I'm not even so sure I would have liked to stay. But so I end up getting an attorney. I signed a separation agreement. I thinking, okay, fine. It's November. In January, the hiring season starts. I'll just go get a job closer to home. I'm almost excited about the possibility of moving to a new district and starting what I had started at View Ridge. And then I'm at the beach with my dog and my phone rings, and it's the reporter. And she's like, "Hey, I got a copy of the investigation. I want to ask you some questions." And I asked her, I said, wait, how do you got copies of that investigation? I said, "I put in a public record request. They said it was going to take months because they have to redact all the names." She goes, "Nope, the teacher gave it to me." I said, "Can you send me a copy?" She goes, "Yep." And so she sends me a copy. It is the raw copy. There are no names redacted off of that investigation. Someone leaked it to the teacher, and the teacher leaked it to this reporter, according to the reporter. And so I tell her, I'll talk to you off the record, but I'm not going to be interviewed for this. And so off the record, I explained to her how, that we had a student that the district did not know what to do with students with severe behaviors. They told us they weren't putting any more Black kids in the behavior disorder program. They were not giving him the services that he needed, on and on. I was saying that would probably be a better story to tell, but that's not what happened. And then on December 4th of 2020, the district sends me an email and says that the teacher is appealing it and she's going to add more witnesses. I'm furious. I call up the district and I said, "You cannot add witnesses to an appeal. It's against your own policy." I read him the policy. He says, "I know the policy." And I said, "Well, your policy says you can't add witnesses. It's just an appeal of the decisions that were already made." And he says, "Well, we're going to reopen the investigation. We're adding witnesses. I'm not asking you, I'm telling you." And that's what happened. That's December 4th. The next day, the article comes out. So I had a dog that was 6 months old at the time, and a daughter, and my daughter was, 13, 14 at the time. And I say, "Let's go take Bernie the dog to Green Lake. We got to go." Green Lake is like the heart of Seattle. It's a lake with a walking path around it. I said, "He's got to learn to be around people and dogs and to walk." And he hadn't really learned that yet. So we go there. We get about 10 feet down the path when he's just tugging and yanking at every dog, every food morsel, every person that passed. And my daughter's going, "Dad, this isn't going to work. We got to turn around and go back." I said, "All right." And then my phone starts blowing up. People are calling me, and I answer the phone. I was like, "Hi." My buddy's like, Ed, the article's out. I said, oh, okay. And he goes, it's horrible. They roasted you. They just ripped you to pieces. And I said, you're kidding me. And my heart just sank. And my daughter's like, Dad, let's go back. And the leash breaks. I'm getting this news. I'm holding the dog. He's yanking. It breaks. The dog takes off running. I've got my buddy in my ear yelling, go read the article. It's just this moment of, I don't even know how to explain it. You're just out of your body. It's like, how is this happening? And I finally catch up, get the dog, get him back to the car, put him in the car. My daughter sits into the passenger seat, and she's waiting for me to get in. And I said, let me take a moment. I got to read this article. And I sit on the curb and I start reading it. And with everything that was in there, it was just punching me like, no, you got that wrong. That's not what the report says. And no, that's not what happened. And no, they said that people had called it a cage. And the person they quoted later said that he had never said that. 2 people who were quoted told me they'd never been even interviewed for this. It was all coming out of the investigation, which had just been dismissed. And there was just one misinterpretation or flat out lie after another in the articles. Like everything she got, like she was treating it like the investigator was determining fault, and they don't. They investigate and they give to human resources to determine whether something was wrong or not. And eventually they came back and said, no, there was none of this was wrong. I mean, it was simple, small things. And then the one that just really ripped me to pieces is the speaker tag, who is white. And what I mean by that is they said Ed Roos, comma, who is white, comma, ... And when you add someone's race in there, you're insinuating that this was a racist situation, that there was no reason to point out someone's race other than you're trying to make it about race. And it was not. And that one just absolutely gut punched me. It just squeezed my stomach so tight, and it didn't release for days. I couldn't eat for days. I couldn't sleep for days. And needless to say, it didn't get much better after that. It was just a total gut punch. I kind of start thinking about why me? Why'd they do this? Well, in the article, before the article's even over, the first article that comes out, there's 2 school board members who are saying that they're working on banning isolation and restraint. So they obviously need a scapegoat. They need an example for this. And they've been using it as an example ever since. It's in the legislature as we speak. I just spoke to a politician the other day, and they do refer to a kid being caged as an example. You've got the reporter. I didn't know it at the time, but she had an ongoing series on the abuse of kids in Seattle schools. If I'd known that, I probably would have known the angle that she was going for. But I didn't know that at the time, but it was at the end of her article. You've got the teacher and a couple parents and an attorney who are going to stand to make millions in lawsuits. So they're salivating over this news. It was just the perfect storm, but it just destroyed my life. Now in 2022, all investigations were dismissed. This is 2 years later after the article came out. EEOC dismissed it, Seattle schools dismissed it, and so did OSPI, which is our state organization for education. All dismissed it. 2025, which would have been just last summer, I was dismissed from the teacher's lawsuit. So everything's been dismissed. There's no evidence whatsoever for any of these claims. I had such a great history of doing all I could for all students. And it was pretty clear and evident that that's all I was doing, in keeping kids safe at school and focusing on student learning and growth. There was just no way that these accusations would stick, and they did not.
Wow. So to clarify, it was an open gym space that you were with this student, and there was other adults in there with you guys. And this was the procedure and protocol that was agreed upon by the district, right?
That is correct. Not only by the district, but the mother knew also. She was a volunteer in our building. She was there almost 5 days a week. She had seen this space. Yes, it was a typical play court that you would see in any building that was built in the 50s. If you look at the original article that I wrote on Fair for All, you will see a picture of it. That's exactly the space where we were when they called this space a cage. And the problem was that after this, it went viral. The New York Post picked it up, the Washington Post, it's out on the wire. And then it just went all over the place. There was one, here's the worst headline. This is what it came to, because you're calling the space a cage, or like a cage, I think KUOW said. But in people's head, they're picturing a cage. They're not thinking of a play court where you're playing with the student. But the worst was that a headline that said, "Principal locked Black special needs boy in cage like animal in his zoo." That's the image that it created with the headline and what they started with. And it should be noted that, yes, KUOW, the original article, did reach out to me. After that, it went to, like I said, all these other organizations. It was the headline story on our local evening news. And KUOW did a follow-up article, I think a year or two later. Not one of them reached out to get my side of the story. If they had just called and said, "I want to clarify a few things," I would have set the record straight. I would have quoted the district's policy. The district had a policy for isolation and restraint. Every single parent who comes to an IEP meeting is given a copy of this. They know it exists. Students who have severe behaviors, we go further. We get a BIP from BIP for them. I think that's the behavior improvement plan. We get a emergency response protocol and ERP, which is basically telling them that I think it's asking them, if your student is having severe behaviors, what would you like us to do? And we lay out the plan. And so they know exactly what's going on every step of the way.
Wow. And I just think it's so unbelievable that your district implemented the policy, you had the parents' permission, it was the established protocol, and they just left you out to dry like that. That is absolutely shocking.
I would like to think it wouldn't have happened in 2016, and maybe it wouldn't happen today. But I think because in 2020, it was the height of just this divisive DEI, this every white person is a racist. And I think that when you say that, you just put a target on our back. And I don't think anyone's going to deny that there is racism and discrimination in this world, but it's gone too far when you're saying that every white person is a racist. It created, like I said, a target and made it really simple for a lot of people to weaponize this situation and this story and this time and to make millions of dollars off of the situation. And I think that, I don't know, I guess there's this kind of rhetorical question of what is your price to lie? Like, if you to tell a lie that destroys someone's life, but you're going to make millions, rhetorical question, would you be willing to do that? And I hate to say it, but I think some people did. And the side part is that when you sue a school district, you're taking money away from the taxpayers, but also money that should be saved for students. Like right now, there's a real push for the levies. Schools are suffering academically. They need levies. They need extra support. And some people are suing school districts when they are struggling financially already. And I understand there's probably some legitimate lawsuits, but there's also some very frivolous lawsuits where it's just a simple step to get a lawsuit. All you have to do is create a fake ism of some sort, choose your ism, then get some kind of critical mass through media or social media, get some backing with it. Now all of a sudden the attorneys are seeing this and salivating. Then the civil suits are filed, and civil suits are not meant to go to court. I think like 90% of them will settle. And I think that nowadays people assume that settlement means guilt. It does not. It's just set up that way. If you think about it, Gwyneth Paltrow recently was in a civil suit. And I think that the person who sued her never expected her to go the distance, but Gwyneth Paltrow has the resources, as many others do, and she took it to court and won. But that it was so rare to take it to court that it was like national news of, oh my God, she's not settling, she's going the distance with this, and won. But not everybody has that resource. So it gets to the point where they're like, listen, you're going to be facing discovery, which costs a lot of money. We're going to have to interview everybody and do depositions and do all this stuff. It's going to cost you hundreds of thousands, or we could just end it now and settle and go your merry ways. So I think some people are taking advantage of the system. And until we have some kind of tort reform where people who are filing these lawsuits have some kind of responsibility if it fails. So maybe you got to pay the other person's attorney fees, or maybe you got to pay X% of what you're asking for. And it should never be so much money, that it's way more money than somebody has, and it would destroy their lives. So I think as a society, but certainly in education, we need tort reform. We got to stop suing each other.
Wow. And so I may have missed this part in your story, but did somebody sue you or the school district, or do you think they tried to let you go so that they wouldn't be sued?
Well, yes. So there were lawsuits afterwards. The parent did sue, the teacher did sue. I was dismissed from those lawsuits eventually, but it was shocking that I was added as a defendant. I even asked my attorney, why am I being included in this? And he had no other response than, he said, it's rare. They usually go after just the district because they have the money. He said, I think you're thrown in there for revenge. I think they just want revenge. But like I said, I was dismissed eventually. And it also should be noted that I wasn't the only person on that list. The teacher listed 12 people that she felt had discriminated against her.
Oh, so it was the teacher that sued the district and added a bunch of people to it?
Yeah, as defendants. So
And
basically,
so,
she's suing the district and 12 people.
oh, okay.
And I
And
believe that all the people were eventually dismissed. I know I was. I assume the others were too.
okay, and you said the mom got included in on this lawsuit with the teacher?
She did her own lawsuit. I received a letter from my attorney that I was dismissed from that one also.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just trying to wrap my mind around this story. It is like one of the craziest stories I've ever heard. So you're in an open gym. Is this something that you guys had done before with this particular student, brought him to the gym when he was acting out?
It was a little bit different. It was really a timeout space. And yes, our IA would sometimes take him there as a distraction or as a timeout. It should also be noted that he brought his own basketball to school, and he would escape class, grab his basketball, and go hang out in this space. And a lot of times we were just trying to get him to go back to class, and he was refusing to leave this space. So it was kind of a double-edged sword. We knew if we took him there, it'd be a distraction, and he could, chill out and get back to class. But getting him back to class after we've been out there shooting hoops and having a good time was challenging sometimes.
Wow. So it sounds kind of like your hands were tied in that, as you mentioned before, they didn't put him in the program that he truly qualified for. They didn't really have a ton of resources. So it sounds like when he was having dangerous behavior, you guys just had to do whatever you were allowed and sanctioned to do in that situation. And so I'm wondering, when you started looking for other jobs in education, what happened?
Ooh, wasn't pretty. So I started to apply for jobs the following January, and I was just getting slapped with rejections. And a few of the districts were as honest as just stating, we know about your previous history with Seattle schools, and you're not going to have a position in our district. So I have tried to get back. Even recently, as a year ago, a district up where I live was hiring emergency subs. They were desperate for subs. And I just thought, okay, I'll just go back and be a substitute teacher. I'll help them out here. I applied. I got a rejection of, we know your history with another district, therefore you're not going to have a spot at our district. So entire districts were blacklisting me. And so it's difficult to get past the headlines. The headlines are out there forever, even though I've been dismissed from every lawsuit and every investigation came back with no findings, and just throughout the investigations, because the accusations were absolutely ridiculous. I can't get over the headlines that are on the internet. Those are out there to stay forever, which would add another piece of the puzzle, which is that we need stricter defamation and libel laws. There's these lies about me out here on the internet, and I don't seem to have any recourse for it. I did contact KUOW. I asked them to take the article down. They wrote me back. It says, we will make corrections, but we will not take it down. I think part B is, the A is tort reform. B is stricter libel and defamation laws, where you should be able to take things down that are not true about you. I would like to see that you can't even post something about someone without their permission. But these are so macro level changes. I don't know how it's ever going to happen. I mean, our law firm's going to ever let you change, do tort reform? Is some of the big platforms out there ever going to let you restrict what goes on the internet or not? So it's tough to get past these headlines. I would like to add in the dismissals that when the Seattle schools dismissed it, They said that the teacher had made accusations, but couldn't remember dates, times, facts, because there was nothing to it, and even couldn't connect what she was saying to how it was discriminatory. And so obviously, I think that when in 2020, when this woke movement and DI movement is making up these rules about what they think is discriminatory of unconscious biases or microaggressions, that it doesn't hold up in any kind of court. You can't say he discriminated against me because he got mad at me one time. In court, they're going to ask you, well, can you show someone else who had a similar behavior as what you're doing? And he treated them differently just based on their race. And there was absolutely nothing there, none whatsoever.
Wow. I'm so mad on your behalf. That is just such a crazy story. I've only had a very small taste of what this kind of situation is like. I worked at a private school, and ironically, it was kind of the opposite situation. It was like an all white private school. I was the only Black teacher, and people made it known very quickly that they did not want me there. So the kids and their parents tormented and harassed me all year long. By the third week of school, the principal's son had created a petition to try to get me fired and had like 2/3 of the seventh grade sign it. They were making memes about me and spreading them all over Instagram. They created a rumor and said that I was looking at pornography in the classroom and telling bloody graphic abortion stories and spread that all over the school. Like, it was absolute insanity. And so I just have a small taste of what it feels like to be vilified over something that is completely false. The school would not protect me. They would not back me up. They kept saying things like, oh, well, this is the middle school beast. This is just middle school behavior. And they would just kind of, it was really clear that they were on the side of like the rich parents and, you know, just the environment. And eventually I just realized they didn't want me there because I was supposed to have my teacher evaluation done. Every teacher in the building had already had theirs, and they just like never bothered to do mine. They ended up putting me on an improvement plan and saying that I needed to build confidence with parents. And it was just one of the most surreal and horrible experiences of my life. And I would have nightmares about that experience years later. Like, it really deeply affected me. And so I know what a taste of that is like, but I cannot imagine like having your name and your image like make it to national news over a complete lie. And so I'm just wondering, like, did you ever kind of think to yourself, like, maybe I need to try to sue these people back, or like what kind of things went through your mind about how to defend yourself?
So I'll touch on that, but I also just want to respond to what you were just saying. You know, it's horrible what happened to you. And what's just to add to that, you know, since I've been coming out and trying to get the truth out there, I've been contacted by a lot of teachers. I've been talking to teacher friends of mine around the area. Every single one of them has either a personal experience or knows someone who's been falsely accused of something. It's so rampant right now. And I think it has to do with social media, that people love to get on social media late at night and start posting stuff that just blatantly isn't true. And when you talk about what a nightmare it was, yes, I was living a nightmare. I would literally fall asleep, dream of being back in the building. And I lost a lot of great friends there. I felt like we were building a family as a staff there. And like I said, you know, in 2019, 96% of them liked being there most of the days. We were building something. I was close with these people, and all of a sudden, boom, I'm just cut off from them. And so I would have dreams when I went back there and everything was back to normal. And I'd wake up just going, oh my God, I'm living a nightmare. It's a horrible thing. Now, as far as suing, no, I up to this point have not considered suing. I tried to get some support with just some legal defense and maybe a little bit of legal offense, but nobody wanted to touch it in 2020. I'd get one of two things. People, attorneys who would say, oh no, I'm not touching that issue with the 10-foot pole. We're not going there. Or ones who would say, yes, we do those kind of lawsuits, but we are so swamped right now, we can't help you with that. And so there just wasn't a lot of support. At this point, it seems like a lot of statutes of limitations have expired. When you sign a separation agreement, there's typically a no sue clause in there, which I did do. So I don't know if I have a lot. If there are attorneys out there who think differently, message me at edwardroos.com, and maybe there is something there. But I don't know how I feel about going after districts too. I would be open to discussing it with someone, but there's just something about that bothers me as well. So I'm not sure where I would go with that. I like to talk about it.
I totally understand. Yeah, I've had like a ton of people comment to me whenever I share my story, like, why didn't you sue them? And it just didn't really like occur to me. I don't feel like the suing type. So I totally get it.
It's not fun. Being in lawsuits is not fun.
Yeah.
So I don't know what to say about that part.
And do you think with this teacher that went after you, that literally if you had not have corrected her about her tardiness, that none of this ever would have happened?
I'm not so sure. She had a history of it. She had filed an OCR complaint against the previous principal. The previous assistant principal had issues with her, and it continued after I left. And so it's tough to say. I think that, like I said, it was the perfect storm for her. Everything came together. She'd been trying to accuse anyone who gave her feedback of discrimination. And I think that finally in 2020, she found a way to weaponize the situation and make it happen. So I don't know. She just kind of had a steady history of doing it year after year after year after year. Started before I got there, continued after I left. I think I just was at the wrong place at the wrong time for that, I think.
That's crazy. Wow. And I mean, I have so many other questions about your teaching history, but I'm just like so stuck on this story. But I guess we can move on for now. And I'm just curious, as a principal, what was it like dealing, or even a teacher, what was it like dealing with student behavior? Did you have like a
Ooh.
lot of defiance? What was that like?
Yes. Student behavior was off the charts in schools, and anyone would tell you that. So, when I was at the Title I school, this was back in 2003, it was a very difficult neighborhood to grow up in, that with, the projects down the street and whatnot. And these kids didn't all grow up in the best neighborhood. And I think that also when you deprive boys of being able to be boys, it shows up in the classroom. So the way I would describe it is that when I was growing up, we were free range kids. I just grew up in this beautiful neighborhood in Seattle, Capitol Hill. We were a Catholic neighborhood, so families with 13 kids. There were kids everywhere. And we went out and we climbed trees and we fought and we got out of conflicts and we ran and got into mischievous stuff. And we were learning along the way how to deal with conflict, and we were getting rid of our energy. By the time we got to school, it was almost time to sit down and rest, but we knew that as soon as school was out, it was time to go get wild again. But when you are living in an area, maybe an era and an area where it's not safe to be out in the neighborhoods playing, and so you're inside a lot, and unfortunately playing video games now a lot, and just sitting here with this stimulus of video games, or even the shows that kids would watch, where it's just boom, boom, boom. Every few seconds, you're being stimulated with something. And then you say, okay, let's go sit down at school. I think it's just like boom until the energy comes out at school. And so there were times where, yes, I've seen desks thrown. It was almost bragging rights at the school to show the scars that we had from situations where the PE teacher used to say, oh, I got this scar from, this time that a student did this. So, throwing stuff, having to evacuate the room, and while one student would be blowing up, and they would just destroy the room. And then we'd get the counselor and the principal in there to calm it down. So yes, we saw behaviors. And by the time that I was principal, I remember a special ed teacher crying to me once. She'd been teaching maybe for 40 years. And she said, I used to get maybe one student a year with behaviors. And now she says, it just seems like it's overwhelming. It's, 10 students per year with severe behaviors. We're just chasing them. No one has answers for it because everyone's afraid to do anything. Now, the district does have I don't know if they still do, but an isolation and restraint policy when I was there. Because when I was a kid, if there was a fight, you just go out there, pull them apart. And if one kid was trying to attack the other, you'd hold them back. You can't do that anymore. Now it has to be done a certain way. You got to follow procedures, and you got to have training for it, and only certain people can do it. It's just very difficult. And so the solution that they come up with is, if a student is blowing up, let's just evacuate the room. Let's take the 24 kids out of the room and let this one kid just let it out. And they destroy the classroom, destroy projects, destroy other kids' work. It's disheartening to see and to let that happen. And then we just go in there and monitor and make sure the kid's safe and not harming himself or others until he decides to chill out. And then you got to hold him accountable and have him put it back together and clean up and all this other stuff. But it's just not working. It doesn't, I don't know. I think holding them accountable and making them clean up might make them think twice about doing it again. But I'm just seeing it again and again where this is the district's solution. And I think in Seattle schools now that they've gotten rid of their behavior disorder program and they're just doing inclusion. So they're included into the regular ed classroom and you got to just figure it out. And usually with those type of programs, there's not a lot of training or support from the district, and it gets out of hand. And I would say this, that as a principal, almost every student who came into my office had an inordinate amount of screen time. Sometimes I think that the parents are embarrassed and they would paint a very pretty picture of what happens at home. And they're talking about, well, at our evening dinner and we talk about this, and then we go out and we watch 1 hour of TV. But that's not what the kids are saying. The kids are like, oh yeah, I'll watch whatever I want. And other kids are like, oh, his house is the best, man. He's got the whole basement to himself and we could go over there and game, and his parents aren't allowed to be down there. And he yells upstairs for mom to bring him drinks. And, it was definitely an inordinate amount of screen time was the number one factor. I'd say number two, unfortunately, there were a lot of single moms, dads not being in the household or involved. And that's not the same thing against single moms. I've seen single moms who are very successful, but I also noticed that a lot of the kids who came through my office were from single moms who were struggling. Or there's something people aren't going to like to hear, but you can have maybe one ineffective parent in a relationship. You can't have two. When you have two ineffective parents and the kids in my office blowing up, and I got both parents here, and I'm the one who's having to say, excuse me, at school, we do not climb on chairs and use that kind of language or talk to other people like that. I'm the one who's correcting their behavior, thinking there's two parents in here. Why are neither of you correcting this behavior? It's just a little bit combination of everything nowadays is contributing to an increased amount of kids with behaviors, and their behaviors are getting a lot worse. That's why here locally in Seattle, it seems like every time there's like a car theft, or we have a story now about a 12-year-old boy who attacked someone with a screwdriver. They're young kids nowadays doing these crimes. And it's and then the 6-year-old who shot their teacher. It's getting younger and younger, and it's getting to be a little bit crazy out there. I think, I hate to say, but I think educators are in danger. I'm your nightmare. I'm what could happen to you. I wasn't aware that you could be personally sued for things that happen at work, but you can be, and it's just devastating to you, your family, and everything else.
Wow. And did you see a change over the past couple of decades in what was considered permissible in terms of discipline? Because I know I started teaching in 2013, and I graduated from high school in 2005. And so it was nothing for a kid to be held out of recess. We could even be assigned, like writing lines, like I will not chew gum in class. But by the time I got in the classroom, they're like, oh, right, having students write lines, like that's corporal punishment. You can't do that. Then they're like, oh, you can't hold kids out from recess. And just like as I continued all the way through 2021, it was getting to the point where, detentions and suspensions were seen, as this horrible thing. And so did you see that same kind of trajectory where you're just not allowed to discipline kids?
Yeah, absolutely. When I was at Laurelhurst Elementary, I was head teacher there, and they had the behavior disorder program, and sometimes behaviors would get out of line. And we know that lunchrooms are very difficult to manage. You usually have like one or two people trying to manage an entire lunchroom, but usually, I was there by myself. There'd be, 100, 200 kids in the lunchroom trying to manage it. And if kids were doing things that was just off the charts, like, yelling in there, because once you start yelling, then everyone's voice goes up, or throwing food, fighting, any of these extreme behaviors, I would ask them to stay in the lunchroom and chill out until, it was time to go out. Now, by the time that I leave the district in 2020, a blog in that neighborhood says, oh my God, Ed Rich used to keep people in at recess and he was just awful to these kids. It was like, yeah, it was considered to be a bad thing, which should be noted, which they did not put in their blog, was that when I left as a head teacher there, the funding had been cut for my job, and the parents started a campaign, and they called it Ed for Head. They took a picture of my head, put it on sticks, and they were protesting my position being cut and saying we need to raise money to get Ed back. And they raised money from the community to bring me back to that school. Unfortunately, it didn't come in time, and I'd been offered a position at View Ridge and had left But I had a great experience there. The blog did not mention that.
Wow. So it sounds like you really had people like personally target you and just go after you. That's crazy to me.
Yeah, here's what I would say about that just kind of is unfortunate. When you go back and you comb anyone's life, you just comb through it and look through it. Have you ever ticked someone off in the past? You know they're just waiting for their moment to come out and say, aha, he one time did this. And that's kind of what happens with something like that. And I can't remember the name of the word, but there's a word that you and I were talking about before the podcast that is enjoying watching the pain and suffering of others. And I think that unfortunately, from the time that something allegedly happened to the time that I left, they had years to complain, years to say something. No one said anything. But as soon as you get falsely accused, then there was just a few people would come out. And they're really vague things like no names with them, no names with the students, no names from the parents. All of the complaints look very similar. Like it could have just been one person posting the same, thing over and over. They're waiting to get you. But, at the same time, I think by the time I left, I had such a great reputation that also a lot of people couldn't say anything bad. And at one point, the opposing attorney gets upset by that and says, how come no one's talking to me? Because there was nothing to be said. They weren't going to throw me under the bus, for no reason. There was nothing there. And he thought that they were being discriminatory by not speaking with him when truth was there was nothing there for them to report on. Oh, I should point out that one interview, they were trying to say, they asked everyone during the interviews, did you ever hear Ed Roos say anything derogatory or discriminatory? Every single person said no. They could not corroborate any story. One person went as far as saying, no, this was not discrimination. He was clearly anti-racist. That didn't make it in any of the articles.
Wow. And I saw your story on the Radical Center, and you kind of talked about how you actually were like a champion of Robin DiAngelo and you were all on board with the DEI and everything. Has this nightmare changed your viewpoint at all?
I'm not proud of that. The district brought Robin DiAngelo in as a guest speaker. So it was certainly encouraged to talk about what she did. And again, I wasn't going to talk about the divisive stuff of oppressors and victims. It's just I thought it was a horrible message to tell anyone that in your life, there's going to be barriers to your success. I think we tell the opposite. You could do whatever you want. You need to overcome any barriers that may come up, but you're going to charge ahead. You're going to be successful. Here's how you do it. Like I did with my mentor group at Thurgood Marshall, where I brought in Black men who had been successful. They were telling these kids, here's how I was successful. Here's how you could be successful. You're going to go to college. I remember we did a training with a guy named Michael Wynn. Michael Wynn, back in the 90s and I think probably early 2000s, wrote about empowering Black boys. And he came to Thurgood Marshall and he doesn't mess around. He writes books and he includes a workbook. So in his trainings, he brought this workbook and he would say, listen, all you guys had to go to college to be here today, but I don't see it on your doors. I don't see it around the school. I don't see any of your banners, anything about college. And he goes, I want you to write your colleges and ask them for as much stuff as they will send you. And I want you to decorate your doors with your college so that everyone knows there's all these different colleges, all these opportunities, all you guys have college degrees and that they could do it too. And then you would say, okay, you're going to do it right now. And I remember teachers going, now? Yeah, right now. Get out a piece of paper, write a letter right now. Like he made you do the work at the workshop. And he told you, by the time you get out of here, you're not going to have anything to do because we're going to do it all during the workshop. He was awesome. But again, it's that empowering students and empowering people. I was not going to teach any of the divisive stuff, but certainly talking about white fragility was encouraged. And I touched on it, but I didn't go all that deep. And for those who are, he deserted because he taught DEI, I've heard your comments. I would say that, first of all, I'm in Seattle. So when you're in Seattle, you grow up with a certain level of PC-ness. And I think that it's just diverse. So we're around each other. We're learning from each other. My high school was extremely diverse out there in the Seattle Central District. And you just have an understanding and appreciation for each other's cultures. It used to be, let's celebrate each other's cultures. Let's understand each other. Let's celebrate our differences. That's what the 80s and 90s and what I grew up on. And so I have a healthy sense of what true diversity would be. And I didn't mind sharing that. And like I told you, my focus was on welcoming and inclusive environments. I did not touch on divisive stuff. So not proud to say that anything from that book ever came out of my mouth, but it did.
Yeah, and I just think that there's been such a change in, the past 15 or so years, because when I joined Teach for America, it was kind of like the height of the charter school era, and they were all about discipline and accountability and really serious behavior management. Like when you walked in some of those charter schools, it was expected that you're silent in the hallways. When you would walk into a classroom, students were expected to be sitting up straight, looking at and tracking the teacher. There was discipline and there was order, and it was like crisp and amazing. And they really focused on the fact that, the achievement gap can be closed through discipline and hard work. And it was just, that was the Teach for America era I entered in. And then just a few years later, sometime maybe between like 2016 through 2021, it's like the conversation shifted, and I started having these professional developments where we had to sit down and write the characteristics of whiteness and then talk about how we need to eliminate whiteness from the institution of education. And there was just more talk about systemic oppression. And then slowly they started saying that, certain discipline standards were considered to be white. And they brought in this professional development guru who had written a book. And the whole premise of the book was about how Black girls are criminalized and they should be able to say what they want and wear what they want and act how they want. And anybody that's trying to hold them to a certain behavior standard is actually, oppressing them. And it happened so fast. It was almost like it was overnight, but I was like, I don't agree with this. This is crazy to me, because I feel like the very characteristics and traits that people need for success, which is discipline, hard work, sometimes biting your tongue, being respectful to authority, goodness forbid, respecting authority, like those are skills that are needed for success for everybody. And so when they got into that weird vibe, I was just instantly not on board. But I think your story shows how like the DEI movement can have a very dark underbelly where maybe somebody somewhere in some unicorn land is thinking that this is going to help Black people and thinking that this is going to create, harmony between the races, but it's the opposite. Now you're suspicious of white people, and now you can't discipline Black students because it's automatically thought, oh, this person is racist. And now you can't even question, decisions or parenting styles. It's just like this whole like ball that you're not able to touch anymore because everybody is afraid of being accused of being racist. And I just think it's horrible. And I get in trouble for it a little bit, on the internet, because people assume that if you're against that you're somehow against, like true diversity and true multiculturalism, which really means, being kind and embracing differences and loving everybody and treating people kindly. Like to me, that was more like the MLK version of social justice, like about the content of your character and not the color of your skin. And it's insane because it's flip-flopped where everything is about the color of your skin. And now people are being taught, they might as well come out and say that whiteness is inherently evil. And it's like, it's an evil that cannot be expunged no matter what you do. And I'm just so against it. And I don't care who it makes mad. I just see in stories like yours and even in the outcomes for students that are in these environments, it's just so toxic and unhealthy. So that was my unsolicited rant.
Yeah, and I'd like to add to that there's no legitimate data that supports that that's working and healthy. It's quite the opposite. I think that in that book I talked about earlier in Race to the Bottom, at one point they tried to implement some kind of math program that was, an ethnic studies math program, one of those ones that we always talk about where 2 + 2 doesn't have to equal 4. It could really equal whatever the person puts on the paper, and math scores went down with that. The data will not support that being divisive helps anyone. I think if you look at Black student scores through out the time that we've done this, I don't think you're going to show an improvement that could be attached to this kind of divisiveness. However, what I would like to point out, as I said before, is that I focused on inclusion because everyone felt welcomed in my building. They were represented in my building. They saw themselves in my building. And so this welcoming, inclusive environment. And as a result, our data went up and went through the roof. And the achievement gap was being reduced. And as a result, as I said before, we were given an award. We were a school of recognition because our data showed that what we were doing worked. Our academic data went up, but also just for the BIPOC community, special ed, and ELL, all these different categories were shooting up because I was making people feel welcome, empowered, successful, like they saw the pathway to success at my school. And it wasn't through hate and hatred and hating on each other. That's not acceptable.
Absolutely. And I'm just kind of wondering, have you seen a change in students? And do you feel like social media is affecting students negatively now?
Absolutely. I'm also a parent. So I'm getting it from both sides. I've been in the schools as a teacher, as a leader, and I'm a parent of 2 teenagers. So yes, this is what I think social media does to you. You start clicking on things, say TikTok, and it starts taking you to the left if you're clicking on left stuff, or to the right if you start clicking on right stuff. And I have conversations with my kids where I'm telling them something and they've gone down, say, this path, and I'm going, that's not quite the full truth. And you're not hearing this other path because your algorithm keeps pulling you to one side. So I think the social media is set up to divide us and to bring us further apart. And I don't know who's to blame or who's behind that, but the algorithms are absolutely dividing kids, teaching kids about this victim mentality. And then I have to find some way that I'm a victim of this, that, or the other thing is extremely unhealthy. And like I said, every teacher I know is now being falsely accused because of this victimhood mentality that we've created. It's very dangerous. And I just feel like I'm so divided here because I loved education. I loved what I did. I was meant to do that. We would sit in meetings and I'd have 2 teachers and a parent, and the parent would be yelling and screaming. And I would just sit there and listen and try and hear their message and not their words and not their tone. And then we'd get to a solution. I was really good at doing that and resolving conflict. And then the parent would leave and we'd all kind of take a deep breath, and the teachers would go, I don't know how you do that. And I would tell them, I was born to do this. I grew up in a family of 5 boys. We fought and argued all the time. I always was able to just remain chill and get through it. But, it's just becoming more and more difficult. And I'm split between telling people don't go into education. I got to do that with my own kids. They would both make fabulous teachers. My son would make the best PE teacher ever. My daughter would make the best kindergarten teacher ever. And when I recommend it to him, my wife gets mad at me now, says, don't you dare lead him down that path after what's happened to us. And that's sad to me that I have to send that message, but you're in danger. This can happen to you. I'm just a normal guy. I was doing what I thought was the right thing. And my livelihood got absolutely destroyed. And Dave Chappelle says it's best in one of his stand-up. He says, taking a man's livelihood is akin to taking his life. They took my life.
I'm just curious, what do you wish everybody knew about the teaching profession? It could be like other admins, districts, just the average person on the street. What do you wish they understood about education?
That it's a very difficult job. I get so angry when people say, the teacher's got another vacation. The teacher's got another break, or they're making too much money, or whatever it might be. And out here in the Northwest, teachers are well paid. After, 15 years or so, you're probably making over $100,000. And the way I tell people is, listen, when I'm in the classroom, I don't have a moment to think for myself. I can't even leave the classroom and go take a leak. I don't have time during the day like you do. I've talked to people and they said, I just planned out how to build my deck while I was sitting at my desk. I can't do that. You are mentally on every moment of the day that you are there. And it's exhausting. Try to be just in hyper focus of constantly keeping an eye on 24 kids at all time, making sure that they're all striving, doing their best. You're pushing them, you're encouraging them, that no one's flying under your radar. You're just hyper focused at all time. It is exhausting. It is difficult, and teachers deserve every single break that they get. When I had summers off, it would be like 2 months off. It took me that long to decompress and to build back up and to be ready for the next year. Don't ever say teachers have too much time off and aren't paid enough, because they're teaching our future. How can that be possible to pay them too much for that?
Thanks for sharing. So I'm curious, I like to ask people if you had a magic wand that you could wave and just change education. I'm curious what you would change.
Oh, that's going to be controversial. I think that particularly in inner city schools, it's broken. It's very broken. And I'm not sure that there's a fix for it. But at the same time, I don't like telling people give up on education, bail out. This is what I think is the only solution. And perhaps in comments, you could give me a friendly debate about this. But this is what I think is the solution and the only solution. You have to have a voucher system. So in the state of Washington, I think we pay about $19,000 per student. Give those students a $19,000 voucher to be used at whatever education they want. So for example, you want to go to private school, here's $19,000 for you use towards private. You want to do homeschooling, here's $19,000 for you to homeschool. Because people are leaving the public education because it doesn't fit their needs. They're not getting the public education they deserve. Let them go and get it elsewhere. Those who will argue that this will take money away from the public school system or schools, only if you suck. People won't use that $19,000 to go to your school. It creates a little bit of competition. And if all of a sudden you've got this golden ticket to go wherever you want, and you see people are leaving the district to go elsewhere, the district should wake up and say, we need to do something to attract these people back to the district. Let them come to you with their voucher. Do what you have to do to make them come to you. If people think there's a flaw in my argument, add it in comments in a nice way and I'll check it out.
Sounds good. Any other just solutions or things that you would really like to see change in education?
The problem with it is that what I'd really like to see is at such a macro level. And I mentioned on them earlier, we have to stop making it easy to sue. That's why people are doing what they do in schools, because they're afraid of being sued. So if people have some kind of risk in filing a lawsuit, it might stop it. But teachers can't do their job because they're afraid all the time. So you're always afraid of what you're going to say, what you're going to do, what's going to be misinterpreted. It goes hand in hand with the libel and defamation laws. We're just afraid all the time to do what we really want to do. And as I stated before, I think the voucher system would help solve a lot of problems, but I just think we need some pretty serious macro changes here. I would add that I've started a consulting business. I've been running that since I left. It's not as successful as I'd like it to be, but if you would like to engage in some of these conversations, you could look me up at edwardroos.com, send me a message, and let's start a conversation about how we can improve public education, because I think it's broke in most of our cities around the country.
And that kind of leads into my next question of what's next for you.
I had gone into the nonprofit sector. I just left that job. It was part-time anyways, because I'm working on finishing up a book about my experience. So I needed time to finish my book. I need time to build up the consulting business. And I really want to look into getting into advocating for public education, because I am a firm believer in it. We need to get it back where it was, to the point where you and I were talking about back in the days when we're celebrating the differences, making people feel welcome and included in our schools and seen, and doing all the work that we were doing at View Ridge Elementary, because we were doing the work that mattered. We were doing the work that got recognized. We were doing the work that parents said, you've got a great inclusive environment. 96% of the teachers enjoyed working there. Students were happy. Everybody was happy in 2019 before everything hit the fan. So that's what I'd like to work on doing.
Awesome. And can you tell us one more time, if my audience wants to contact you, how do we find you?
You go to edwardroos.com. There's a contact area there. Go there and send me a message. Let me know what you want to discuss, and we'll go from there. But I'd really like to get into helping support the public education system in any way that I can.
Amazing. Well, I've really enjoyed this conversation, and maybe we can have you back in the future, because there's so many things that I could still ask you. But for now, thank you for your time. And audience, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, leave us a comment, and let me know some future topics that you'd like to hear about. We'll see you guys next time. Bye for now, everyone.
Thank you, Trish.